G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. We'll have all the show notes and any resources mentioned in the cast on our website. After studying political science in Australia, Phaedon stumbled into the recruitment space while living in London like any good wandering Aussie. Returning home in mid-2001, he started an executive recruitment firm focusing in the tech startup space with a fellow university friend. Surviving the tech wreck within their first year and the GFC in 2008, it was this second global recession which was the foundation for their fast growth. From 2 FTE in 2001 to now 90 with 18 million in annual revenues across 6 cities in Australia, UK, Singapore and the USA, Phaedon admits they added international offices too quickly. Apart from an investor's $50,000, then another small injection for growth from their new chairperson, they have grown organically from profits. Phaedon exited the business operationally a few years ago, but he's still a shareholder. They had a big focus on mentors and professional development, helping them learn corners of the business they weren't strong in. He wouldn't go back into this industry or any service-based business. Instead, would begin a recurring revenue model like a software-as-a-service product. Phaedon believes the hardest thing in growing a small business is finding product-market fit, and advice he would give himself on day one is keep it simple and pricing before anything else. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm interviewing Phaedon Stough. Thanks for your time today, Phaedon. You've got a couple of businesses we're going to talk about and hone in on one.
Yeah, thanks, Troy, for having me on the show.
Let's start with how we know each other. We were just trying to both remember that. We think it might have been vaguely 22, 3, 4 years or so ago at a Christ College ball here in Hobart, which not many people have memories of even the morning after, because they would start at 11 o'clock at night, these college balls. Colleges accommodation part of a university in Australia. I think we may have met back then, but more recently it was probably 5-6 years ago when you moved back from San Fran. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, that does sound right. I don't think many people have memories back then.
No. Yeah, I survived 2 Christ balls, even though at the time I wasn't living in Tasmania or studying at the university down here, but I obviously got a great network of Tasmanian friends that convinced me to move to this beautiful island. So
good to see you're at the right college balls, mate.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So tell the audience a bit about your business. Pick one business and what it does, where it's located, how it makes money.
Yeah, well, I think the business we're talking about today is my previous business, which I've exited, which was a executive recruiting business called MitchelLake. So we started the business in 2001 in Sydney with a focus on working with emerging or startup tech companies. And we grew it over the next sort of 15, 16 years to just under about 90 people, about 18 million in revenue, working across about six geographies.
Great, yeah. Fantastic. And so how many started out? Was it just yourself and your business partner?
Well, it was another Christ College guy, John Tanner.
Oh, right. I probably met John at one of those balls as well, yeah.
Yeah, John and John were good friends.
Right, okay. John Perry. Yeah, great. And so for the audience that don't really know much about the recruitment space, I guess give us an overview of how that, what the business model is there. How does the business make money?
Yeah, it's a vicious industry, recruiting. It's really kind of spreads the gamut between horrific to great, and You'd probably sort of put 90% in the horrific bucket and 10% in the great. So we used to work on pretty much executive search projects. So people would come to us and ask us to recruit a head of engineering, a CEO, a board member, senior engineering leader, someone like that. And the business model in essence works is that you work on retainers. So the client would pay you a retainer to kick the project off, a retainer at a certain stage of when you got to a milestone, and then a completion fee.
Right. Great.
Which is pretty established. Executive recruiting's been around for 50, 60 years. It's dominated globally by some very, very big brands. But we were kind of always going to be very niche, really highly, highly focused in that kind of startup tech space, and the business still is.
And how did you discover that niche? Did you or John have a technical background or a HR recruitment background?
The pivotal moment for us was I started after travelling for a very long time, ended up in London, as most Aussies do, I had an honours degree in political science in Chinese politics. I saw an ad which was for a researcher, thinking that it would be a research role. It was an executive recruiting company, so I didn't read the ad very well. I rocked up somewhat intoxicated, took the job, and that's how I kind of fell into executive recruiting. So I ended up really enjoying the analysis part of it. And the firm that I worked for in London was very, very tech focused. So that's where I got my first foray into working with tech companies, most of them US companies expanding into Europe and setting up operations. And then when I came back to Australia, I based myself in Sydney, and I worked for a very small boutique but highly specialised again startup tech recruiting business. Did a couple of years with them, really kind of loved it. And then one of our candidates who had just come back from New York, we interviewed, and the candidate sort of said that was the strangest interview I've ever had in my life.
Were you still drunk?
Probably. We used to do a lot of our interviews in cafes.
Right. Yep.
We really wanted to not be too sort of dictatorial, I guess, in how we interviewed people. We wanted people to be relaxed and informal, tell us their life story. We saw it more as sort of matchmaking rather than here's a specific brief, fill the brief. So we were very personalised in our approach. And the candidate gave us this book, and the book was a book called E-Boys, and it's about a US VC firm, and the US VC firm hired a partner who was an executive recruiter. And the book's basic premise is not about, just investing money. It's about building teams in that startup phase and how important the people element was.
Absolutely.
So that really kind of turned us on to this is what we want to do. And I brought John into the previous firm, and then John and I, this was back in the recession in 2001 when the tech bubble burst. The company we worked for went under, and what better time to start a business than a recession?
Yeah, absolutely. So what year did you actually start?
We started in July 2001.
Great. And just so going back then, so your time in London, that would have been late 90s when tech was really booming. That was the first .com real explosion, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was amazing. It was a very amazing time to be in tech. Everything was kind of transforming. There was a lot of hype around it, probably not quite as much reality.
Yeah.
That's probably what tech's kind of known for in some ways.
So how did you not only weather but then grow, starting out, after the tech wreck in 2001, 2002? That was pretty tough times. How was that period for the next few years?
Yeah, for us, we really focused on a bunch of core clients that we knew were doing okay through the process, that had raised enough money, that had enough capital, that had a product market sort of fit that was relevant, that were kind of scaling. And we doubled down with those clients, focused on cash, kept the business very, very lean. And sorry, I just had to let the dog out of the room. So she was working from home. And slowly grew it over that sort of next 3-year period.
Yeah, great. Okay. And so key numbers, you've said you've gone from 2 staff up to around 90 over 15 years or so, 16 years?
Yeah. The core growth for us sort of came out around the GFC, just coming out of the GFC. So we were quite lucky. We'd just set up a US office, hired our first person back in about 2008. And we were about to go really hard into America. And if you're in tech, you remember this. There's a very famous VC firm called Sequoia Capital. They came out with a PowerPoint presentation that they showed to their portfolio called the PowerPoint slide deck of death. And it basically sort of said, if you don't cut your cost by 80% in the next 2 weeks, you're not going to exist. And so we got hold of that because we had a couple of Sequoia portfolio customers. And we really kind of shaved the business and went into a cash conservation mode really hard, which enabled us to then scale out of the GFC without too much debt.
Yeah, great. And so was that a harder trading period for you after the GFC as opposed to when you were starting up, coming out of the tech wreck?
Well, yeah, because our overheads were much higher because we already had a Melbourne and Sydney office. We had one person in San Francisco. I think the team was probably about 15, 16 maybe. Yeah, about that time. And so being a services business in a recession is never a pleasant experience.
No. And so those 6 geographical locations, where did you end up? Where were those offices?
Yeah, so we had offices in Melbourne, Sydney, Singapore, San Francisco, New York, London, And then we serviced a whole bunch of kind of remote markets.
Great. No, that's fantastic growth. That's really good.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting question. Ben from Bulk Nutrients added a few weeks ago. When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
As a founder, it's always a hard question,
Yeah.
I think, right? Because I'm not sure you ever feel like you succeed. I don't know.
It's in our DNA, never to stand still, isn't it? Yeah.
It's kind of that way. It's quite difficult. But I think once you start making money and you look around, you've got a team. Maybe it was actually the time we hired an EA for ourselves.
Yeah.
Like a luxury.
That's a good barometer.
Yeah, at the time that we could afford one. And so maybe at that sort of stage, I think when customers started coming to us, when our reputation grew to a point where, I think we had about 80% of our customer base was reoccurring.
Yeah.
And so that always feels really good.
Yeah, great. And what does success look like to you?
I think because I've, in a different business at the moment, you define that based upon the business. I think for MitchelLake, what success really meant for us was a strong business with a strong customer base. It was the type of projects that you get to choose rather than projects choose you, if that makes sort of sense.
Yeah.
It's always nice to be able to say no to things and really kind of pick the engagements that you want because they really define who you are in many ways.
Yes.
The work that you do. So once we got to that point where our US office, for me anyway, personally, we had, say, the top 5 VC firms starting to refer us work. That was kind of success for us, I think, in many ways.
Yeah, that is a great accolade. Yeah. What about funding? How did the business fund its growth?
We went organic pretty much from day one. John's dad ended up putting a small bit of capital in to kick the business off.
Yep.
In 01, sort of 50 grand.
Yeah.
And we launched off that and paid ourselves basically nothing for a period of time.
Very common startup payment strategy, yes.
Exactly. And then that was pretty much it, really. We had a chairman that came on later. He put a small amount of capital in, but that was around 2015, sort of some expansion growth there. And then we did a great deal with a debt equity funding business out of San Francisco called Partners for Growth, PFG. They're a really fantastic firm that expanded into Australia quite hard. And anyone who's not looking to dilute their cap table but looking for some liquidity, I'd highly recommend them speaking to Jason and Carthy from PFG. Great guys.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Stephen, who I interviewed last week, they use debt factoring, invoice factoring to buy more equity from the original investors before they've listed on the ASX. So they got an amazing return on that. They repaid the debt factoring within a year. So there's some smart ways you can buy back equity or fund your growth. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot more options out there.
Yeah, so that's good. So not too many investors and mainly just organic through cash flow growth.
Pretty much, yeah, all cash flow growth.
That's great.
Which is difficult, I would say.
Absolutely. Particularly you battling through 2 financial crises for your industry, the tech wreck and then obviously the GFC, pretty much for everyone, yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely not an easy journey, but it was great. We built a great team and there was a lot of great people there, pre and current, and it's really nice to have a brand that's respected.
Yeah. Great. And if you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry today? If not, why? And what else would you do?
Yeah, well, I would never do a services business again.
I think I vowed that same about 5-6 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's especially hard when you're servicing SaaS or product-based businesses all the time and you're looking at how they're structured and how they operate. Services businesses are easier to create. You can go to market much quicker with them. SaaS businesses take longer time to find product market fit, but just the recurring revenue line is highly desirable. So no, I wouldn't do a services business again. Yeah.
So you're saying you'd more look to a SaaS-based business, software as a service, which is like cloud-based business for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, my current business, the Innovation Bay business, we're kind of underwritten by some national sponsors, which is great to have then
Yep.
invest in the business kind of upfront, which gives us liquidity for a year, and they're on renewing contracts, which is great, and they're all fantastic partners. And then we have memberships. And so again, it is a bit similar to a SaaS business where people are paying a membership fee, which can be spread over the year or paid in a lump sum up front. So it's nice. It's a very different mindset that sort of business gives you compared to a services business. Services businesses, you're always hunting. You're looking at next month on a continual basis. In a business that's where you've got more continuity to revenue stream, you can think much more strategically. It gives you more time to build product.
Yeah. And the other business you were talking about, Innovation Bay, which I said before we started recording, I'd love to have you back on later this year when you guys have had a bit more growth. You're at 4 FTE, but growing very fast. But the main product there is, from what I understand it, helping tech founders get together and share their wins and lessons and war stories and provide them the support structures to be able to grow as professionals, I guess, to take their businesses to the next level.
Yeah, pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so back on MitchelLake, can you outline the most stressful point in that small business growth journey?
There were definitely a few. I would sort of say going into the GFC was pretty stressful. I would having to downsize the business and focus on cash is never a pleasant experience. And anyone who's made people redundant, I'm sure can testify to the fact that it's a horrible experience that you don't want to go through it ever again. So that was always pretty painful. We probably expanded a little bit too quickly internationally. We went through a phase where we launched America, we launched Singapore, and we had some people in London. And so what we didn't really encounter for is the stress that would cause on the business. I was in America, John was in Singapore. We had another person running Australia for us. And so that, I think simplicity is always really, really important when you run a business. And all of a sudden you can add on this and buy that and take that on board. And then you kind of look back and 6 months later, you're kind of, what the fuck have I just done?
Exactly. You've just got this bloated business. Certainly I'm a big advocate these days of simplicity. Just going back, so what was the time difference? What was the time gap between opening those offices? Was it 6 months, 12 months?
Well, whilst we sort of hired our first person in San Francisco in about 2007, we didn't really launch San Francisco back to about 2012. And then after launching San Francisco in 2012, we set up Singapore in about 2014, and then we already had someone in London at the time. And part of the problem was, America was growing exponentially. We had new management in Australia, so we were giving that business a little bit of time to kind of settle and just kind of grow. Australia was probably growing at about, 15%. America was growing somewhere, it was just ridiculous at 80%.
Wow.
And it was very easy because we only had a couple of people over there. So we were doubling and doubling and doubling, but we grew the US team from 2 people to about, 28 people in about 4 years.
Yeah, all right.
And then Singapore we launched, and Singapore is a very interesting market because, you've got access to these other markets like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, as well as being in quite a kind of tech hub, but there's a lot of regulation structure around it. And it is quite tricky to hire really good people there. It's still quite a small market.
Yeah.
So then we launched Singapore, and we had 4 or 5 people in Singapore.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So you would have spaced that out a little bit more than you think.
Yeah. And I think that if I had my time again, we probably would have focused more on one market than trying to go and service more markets, if that makes sense. The US is a huge market, and so you can be absorbed in America for a decade before you can look up. So California is the 6th largest economy in the world.
Yes.
And so there was a huge amount of growth for us in that market. And I think that we just kind of got stuck trying to build a global brand rather than focusing purely on building a great, highly profitable brand.
Got it. Yeah. And what areas in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
I think leading people is always a really kind of difficult challenge. And you see and experience, the problem that we've had is we get to interview these amazing people, leaders all the time. It's part of our job, right?
Yeah.
To interview people who are great, who are great leaders. And so that sets the benchmark pretty high. Managing people is something that you continuously get better at all the time. It's a great challenge, and I'd like to think that I've kind of evolved in that area. I'm not sure if people would agree with that. But you know.
And what have you enjoyed least about managing the fast growth? That's pretty impressive growth, mate. Over 15 years to go from 2 to 90. That's in 6 or 7 locations. Phenomenal.
Yeah, I think the finances I've always struggled with.
Yeah.
You know, we've had some great CFOs that have helped us over the period, and I feel like I'm trying to speak a foreign language when it comes to reading into spreadsheets.
Yes.
So I wish I definitely was better on that. But you got to play to your strengths.
That's right. Exactly.
That's the key.
Yeah, that's right. And what's been the biggest mindset shift in your small business growth journey for yourself?
I think it's the simplicity thing. There's a great book that's called, is it called Profit First? And it's really about, there's a couple of great books about small business, Small Giants or Tiny Giants, I can't remember, is one, and Profit First is another great one. And I think the mindset is you got to really ask yourself, why are you building a business for? You know, are there personal reasons? Is it a lifestyle business? Is it a business to scale? Is it a business to sell? Is it a profitable business? Are you subjugating profit for growth?
Yeah.
You know, and so if I was doing it again, I'd really sort of think about what was the primary purpose of what outcome I wanted. And that can be very hard to define when you're young. You know, we started the business when we were 27. We literally had no idea what we were doing, you know. I think we had interviewed through a bunch of other recruiting firms, and we were like, all those firms are shit. You know, we'd never want to work for them.
Yeah.
And we can do this. This will be easy.
That youthful hubris or arrogance. Yeah,
exactly.
I think that's a good point. Simplicity and understanding why you're doing something. It's a new mantra of mine the last 5-6 years after first stumbling upon Simon Sinek's TED talk of why.
Yeah.
And then read his book, Start With Why. And I ask myself of any new project or business I'm going into, why am I doing this? Is what's driving me? And I think that's really important because that does then frame a lot of your decision making from there on in, so you get the best return, whether that is financially or just your enjoyment out of that project or business.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, the book I think I was referring to is called Small Giants.
Right. Yep.
And by Bo Burlingham. It's a great book.
Okay, I haven't heard that. I'll chuck that on my Audible list for sure.
Yeah.
What's the number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
I think keeping really close to the customer.
Yeah.
You know, customer engagement is so important, you know, and so without customers, you kind of got nothing at the end of the day. So listening to your customers, understanding what their pain points are, understanding where your product's got to be or your service has to be to engage with those customers, and then working with them. You know, I think a lot of companies have this animosity sometimes to customers. There's like the evil, you know, that I have to suffer to survive my business. But really, your customers are everything. They brand you, they position you. If you engage with them in the right way, they're evangelical about you.
Yes.
Definitely at MitchelLake, we had people who were candidates that had become customers. That was very regular for us.
Yep.
And our mentality was always like, treat candidates as your customer.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, you know, people aren't a commodity. They're an individual and they've got a story to tell and a life. You know, you want to help them.
Yeah, and I think that would build a lot of momentum within your industry because a lot of recruiters particularly can get a bad rep. And if there are good firms out there treating all the people in the transaction well, that can build some real momentum and brand equity.
Yeah, I think it's quite easy. It's easy to differentiate yourself in recruiting from the bottom 90% of the market because it is transactional. And especially in Australia, it's highly, highly transactional and people have a really bad experience with it.
Yeah.
And then when people have a great experience with it, it's transformative.
Yes, yeah.
And that's really important. And it's really enjoyable to see that transformative experience on them.
Yeah.
That's what I used to probably love more than anything else.
Yeah, great. Want to become the best manager you can be? Check out our Kick-Ass Manager course at growasmallbusiness.com. Do the course and add your fellow managers for no extra cost. Join the 30%. 70% of people quit their job because of their manager. Well, especially poignant because your business was or is in the recruitment field. How did you add people to the team? Talk about some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening.
I mean, it's like a barber never cuts his own hair. A recruiting company is always it's always hard to recruit people.
Yeah.
It's like an oxymoron, right? Now, we found recruiting recruiters really difficult. We found it very hard in Australia because there was a very transactional nature towards recruiting in Australia, and so it's a lot of English backpacker type types, and so it was very difficult to then transform people who hadn't had recruiting experience into recruiting.
Yeah.
My if I went back in time, I would hire younger people. I would hire and train younger people. The best people we ever hired were the people we took a bit of a chance on, who didn't come with a profile and scar tissue and a background. They came with raw energy, intelligence, and a desire to learn. They're by far the best people you can hire in my mind. And then, as you grow over time, you get to hire more senior people to help buff the structure out.
Yeah.
But we had a bunch of people that, stayed with the firm for 7-10 years.
Yeah.
And they were some great hires for us.
Yeah, that's one of my things that I look for when looking for whether it's business partners or team members, but attitude and aptitude. You can give people experience, teach them a new area of the business if they're smart and they want to be there and really get into it, That's really powerful. More powerful than someone's got 10 years doing that one thing. If they've got a shit attitude or they're not that switched on, they're a B or a C player and you're just going to pay for it.
Yeah, we churned through quite a few recruiters in the US. And so we had a bit of a different model there where we would have better recruiters into companies and they would work on site at companies. And, some of the worst hires were recruiters that came from very strong brands who we kind of looked at and went, wow, that person worked for, say, for example, like a Facebook or a Google or someone like that. This is going to be awesome. And some of the best hires we ever made were people with 2 years experience that came from a brand we'd not heard of.
Yep. Yeah, right. Yep. Great. And what are some things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
Yeah, I think the key thing is, sometimes founders can be quite manic, right? You can move at a very fast rate. The reality of that is you're going to burn out.
Yeah.
You need to get into a rhythm and a groove that's sustainable. People sometimes people start businesses with the fact that I'm going to be bored, I'm going to be quiet, I'm going to be buying a Porsche in 3 years. It's just not the reality of it. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Yeah. So you need to train to be a marathon runner, not a sprinter.
That's great.
Which means you need endurance.
That's a great bit of advice. Absolutely, yeah. And what anything specifically around culture that you guys did to kind of, because you had a disparate 6 or 7 different locations.
Yeah. You can't over communicate.
Yeah.
I think that you hear it constantly, and I work with a lot of founders at the moment. And so you've got to constantly communicate. And if you find that annoying as a founder, find someone who'll do it within your business.
Yeah.
You cannot over communicate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So especially when you've got remote teams, because you communicate and then you do this. And we used to do, every week we'd have a live stream where we would speak to each other, get all the officers on board. You've got to manage the time zones for it. Then you say something and people take it the wrong way, and this sort of stuff. You've got to cross-pollinate those people all the time.
Yeah,
it's really important. Those are issues with having offices you might not think about in different localities. It's great to have people kind of in one hub.
Yep.
That's another thing I would really kind of think hard about. Global strategies, they're quite difficult.
Yes. Although James McGregor at Bidable, a good friend of yours and mine, they're doing very well with their Melbourne and Hobart office, and I think everyone else then is splayed around Poland, Canada, UK, and obviously the US.
Yeah, he's got a very remote team, hasn't he? It was interesting. Yeah. I actually talked to, I think we were just speaking about it, but I did a podcast with Michael Pryor, who's the founder of Trello. 80% of Trello is remote.
Yeah, I read about that some time ago. They pretty much started out saying we're going to, like the guys at 37 Signal /Basecamp, we're just going to be remote.
And his comment was, it's really, really fucking hard.
Yeah.
So, and the comment was, we only did it because we wanted to hire the best people. So we opened up access, which is, I think, the same reason why James does it.
Yeah.
But, commentary, with a lot of scar tissue on his back, having grown quite a large team, was it is really hard, and you've got to work extra hard to maintain it and to manage it.
Well, yeah, what I find really interesting, and this is one of the reasons why I love business, because there's so many different angles to everything, but James Cooder from Savage Interactive in North Hobart, the iPad app that you know very well, James quite well.
Procreate.
Yeah, he has a very strong policy of no, everyone's got to be here in Hobart. So he's actually moved people from other countries to Hobart, to Tasmania, Australia, the arse end of the world. It's a beautiful arse, by the way, but just because he wants to have them all in the office, because he believes he gets more out of his team when someone's sitting next to each other. He was telling me about one of his developers, was amazing, I think from Russia, and he moved his wife and kids out to Australia because this guy is a gun. It was so good. He said, we would have moved him 3 times around the earth. And that's, so James Cooter does it a little bit differently to James McGregor at Biteable, both tech companies, but James Cooter has the opportunity to have a big remote team like Biteable, but that's his personal philosophy. No, I think I'm going to get more out of my team if we're all under the one roof.
Yeah, you got to play it to your style.
Yeah.
I think the thing to remember is a startup company is not a democracy; it's a dictatorship.
Yeah,
the dictator is the person who started it, and they can do whatever they fucking want at the end of the day, right? And run it the way they want.
Well, you've heard the golden rule.
Yeah,
the man who has the gold makes the rules.
Yeah. And that, there's no good or bad in that; it's just the way it is.
And that's right. You can't have indecision, and what's that saying? If a camel is a horse designed by a committee, you just can't. You've got to have someone at the head of with the hand on the tiller at the helm, driving the ship and making that final decision. If someone can't make a call, say, right, okay, I've listened to everyone, and I did this at one of the distilleries here I ran in Tasmania to have a lot of managers, 7 or 8 managers. And if I couldn't get consensus, I'd say, right, that's it. We're moving on. The middle part of my title is executive. I've just made an executive decision. We're not talking about this anymore. Let's go. Otherwise we'd sit there for another 2 hours and just dilly-dally and talk.
Yeah.
Around in circles. Let's talk a bit about professional development. Did you invest much in yourself over the time?
What we ended up doing, and not initially for a very long period of time, we learned a lot from our network. We're very lucky to interview, a lot of senior people who we built friends with, became friendships with. And so we learned a lot informally from those relationships. And then as we kind of grew, built an advisory board, and the advisory board was great. So we had a whole bunch of different advisors over a period of time. We had a guy called Mark Choden in New Zealand who, built and sold about 3 different recruitment companies. We had a woman in San Francisco called Megan Gardner who raised, she had Harvard MBA, created a startup that raised 28 million, grew to over 1 million customers, and was an advisor to a bunch of tech startups. She was great. And then an Aussie guy who was growing a services business in Seattle. And so they, we would sit down with them, and that was a great sort of learning curve for me, is to have kind of mentors, advisors like that who I had to catch up weekly with and have conversations with, litmus test with. And then I also had some informal mentors that I would go to. So
great. Yeah. I'm a big advocate of mentors and coaches. What about, do you do much professional development yourself these days, reading books, listening to podcasts, courses, conferences, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big conference guy because we're heavy on events in Innovation Bay, and so I go do a lot of our own stuff, so it's always hard sometimes to go to more events. But an avid reader, so there's a lot of great books that are out there at the moment, and business books, sort of, you've got to get the art to how do you read them and consume them, but active reader, and then just a lot of conversations. Yeah,
great. And before we get into the final 5 questions here, there are 2 or 3 business owners that I've interviewed so far that have actually exited. So last week, Stephen, they actually exited onto the ASX after 5.5 years. So the audience in particular would be keen to hear anyone's experience going through that, an exit. A good friend of mine, Mauser, he exited his pharmacy to an ASX-listed company as well. It was a 12-month due diligence. It was painful. Stephen's last week was a 3-week due diligence. So maybe talk a little bit about, one, how the exit came about, what your experience was, and any advice, anything you do differently.
Well, I haven't really had an exit, mate. That's the thing. The innovation, the MitchelLake business is still going.
Yep.
And so I've just stepped away from it.
Got it. Okay.
Fine. So hopefully we'll see how that business goes in the future.
Okay, great. So you're still a shareholder. You're just not working in the business.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. All right. We're on to the final 5 questions then. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
Finding your product market fit.
Yep. Great. And favorite business book which has helped you the most?
Is there one? the one that I'd probably say is a great book is Principles
Yes.
by Ray Dalio.
Ray Dalio. That's the third time that's come up, I think, on my interviews so far. I think this is number 17 or 18. So that's getting higher up on my list, definitely.
It's a great book.
Any great podcasts or online learning tools to use for your own professional development?
Obviously, our own podcast, Open the Pod Bay Doors. But there's a lot of great podcasts out there. I'm just starting to listen to the Quillette ones, which is an Australian news content service, which is great.
What was it called? Sorry,
Quillette.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is pretty awesome. There's also the ex-Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. Is it John Henderson? That has got a great podcast.
Yeah, he's quite a great raconteur and speaker, John.
He is. So I've been listening to his podcast a little bit. He's a little bit on the conservative side, but he interviews some interesting people, so it's great to see. So he's been really, really good. It's not, yeah.
And Open the Pod Bay Doors, your podcast. I've listened to a couple of episodes, as I said before we started, of you and Ian interviewing, and you focus mainly in on tech companies, don't you? Interviewing companies.
We basically we focus on investors, really senior tech folk in larger enterprise organizations, but mostly it's founders.
Yeah, great.
Yep.
And one tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
John Anderson podcast. Sorry.
Yeah, all right. That's it.
That's the one. I didn't want to mix that up. I think like a project management platform, whether you're using Trello or using Monday or anything like that, is a must.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah, I haven't used Monday yet, but
What do you use
for project management?
Yeah.
A lot of my projects aren't that big. If we have to do a Gantt chart, I'll use Smartsheet for that. I've never really. I've tried Slack a bit. Mouse and I and Ferg are working on the Wildebask pods, which I think sent through to you. Yeah. You tried Slack on that, but there's a few Luddites in the team that didn't really get it, so that never really took off. So no, I don't really at the moment haven't pushed over the threshold. I've got my offshore team, so I've got a couple of people in the Philippines and one in Kenya. So I'm almost getting that point now where I'm getting more clients for them that I'm going to have to find something that I can manage their projects and tasks and,
Yeah. I mean, Trello's great.
Is it?
Trello's great. Monday's really good. I like probably Trello. Trello's a bit more. If you're a first-time user, haven't used one before, Trello's probably a bit easier.
I looked at Trello 7 years ago, I remember, but I just didn't get it. So maybe I have to go back and have a look, because as we said earlier, Atlassian bought them a couple of years ago. Yeah, it's a good sign if they're buying. They're obviously a stellar business. All right, finally, my favourite question: what would you tell yourself on day one of starting a small business?
Keep it simple.
Touche. That's great.
Either that or profit before everything else.
Yeah. Yep. That's two great pieces of advice right there. Yeah.
So, and I think lots of good Aussies, when they build companies, because capital isn't as accessible as it is, say, in North America. Yeah. Much harder to raise money. So you generally find Aussie founders do think about profit first, and they think about building a sustainable long-term business, because they also, we're a bit apprehensive about failure. Yeah. So they don't want to turn something over. We're less risk focused. More risk focused, less risk avert. And so, I think a lot of Aussies build very profitable businesses.
Is it true what I've heard that Americans they wear failures on their sleeve a lot more comfortably than, say, Australians do?
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not it's very natural for an American, to sit there and go, I'm going to build $1 billion company.
Yeah.
It'd be very unnatural for someone in Tassie, for example, to say to someone, I'm building $1 billion company.
Yes. Yeah.
Because we would shoot that person down pretty quickly, probably.
Yeah, we would. The old tall poppy syndrome here in Australia. Yeah. Well, thanks, Phaedon. Thanks for your time today. I think the audience get a shitload of value out of what you shared with us today. And as I said, later in the year, we'd love to have you back on again when Innovation Bay gets a little bit bigger and hear about that growth journey as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Troy. Thanks for having me on the show. It's great to catch up.
Same here. Thanks, mate.
Cheers, buddy.
And for our audience, we would greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc. So more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.